Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Aidoo show, the show that aims to inspire you, encourage you, teach you a little bit, and then bring out the best in you. We're going to dub today's show a segment in history lessons. But before we get to that, I want to talk about this week and some of the good things that have happened. I'm very excited about one of the programs coming up at Endless Possibilities, the Women's Courage Festival. This is something I've dreamt about for years. Having a road show that showcases women's talent, women's businesses, women's opportunities, and raising funds to support single mothers and their children in the communities that we serve. So this week, that's what we've been working on. And from September 9th to the 11th at the corner of Jane Finch Mall, we will be there. Come see us, come talk to us, come be part of us, and come join our membership so that we can grow and affect positive change where we serve. Today, I'm excited to talk to this woman that I have followed since I arrived in Canada many years ago. I would say 30 and something years ago that I've arrived in Canada. She's one of the women whose work inspired me to join in community, serve community, be part of those that make a change and those that tell our beautiful African and Black history and those who showcase our stories. Today, our guest is Rosemary Sadlier, and a woman that I have admired for years. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Rosemary. Hi, Rosemary.
Hi, how are you?
I am so good. You have no idea how good I am to be
Well,
talking.
it's wonderful to be on this show with you today.
It is amazing for me. The reason it's amazing for me is that, like I said, I have followed you and your work since I arrived in Canada as a young girl, who was also trying to find her way and who needed mentors and role models, people who spoke her story in the face of not being seen. It was very difficult when I arrived in Canada because I came from Ghana where my role models were right in front of me. Everything I wanted to be was right there. You
Mhm.
know, every help that I needed, there was somebody who looked like me. And then I got to Canada and it was a different story.
Nobody. Yeah.
It was a completely different story. It's not like today where we all know that we have to be part of the story. And many of us are doing the best we can to be the face. So, first, I want to say thank you for doing what you've done all these years and continue to do. So, to be speaking with you is an honor and a privilege on the journey of telling our story. So, welcome.
Thank you so very much. Anna, I have to admit that that was just such a lovely tribute, and I so appreciate it because so much of what I have done as an unpaid volunteer.
Hmm.
And when you are doing things for what you feel is the greater good of the community, um, people don't always appreciate or understand
Yep.
how or why you're doing it.
Hmm.
And but at the end of the day, you hope that people understand,
Hmm.
people value,
Hmm.
people appreciate, people understand why you're trying to make space and tell our story, and people ultimately that it makes things better for everybody.
Hmm.
So thank you so much for letting me know that I touched part of your journey. I
Hmm.
I appreciate that.
You didn't only touch my journey, you actually showed me that it is important to be, to not just sit back, be in the background. What you also showed me was that you have to be in the forefront, you
Mm.
know, asking questions, implementing things. And I find that that is a bit difficult for people. And like you said, for those of us who try to do the best that we can and show our face, a lot of times we face backlash. A lot of times it's a lonely journey, but at the same time, it is worth everything. So, once again, thank you. But
Thank you.
before we go any further, I would like people who don't know you and maybe don't know the story, if you can tell us a bit about yourself. I usually don't want to take it away from the guest because I like the guest to touch on points that they want people to know about them and their journey.
Mm. Well, Anna, like you, um, while I was born in this country, um, there was just really not very much that was representing me or gave me the opportunity to see myself at all in the
Mm-hmm.
broader community. And I had the good fortune of attending a Black church, so that at least on Sunday, in addition to the spiritual elements and the rituals and whatnot, I had the opportunity to see Black people doing things that
Mm-hmm.
and so I knew from my own lived experience that beyond my family, there were Black people in this place doing a wide range of things that were very positive and productive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, when I went, by the time, time goes on and I had the opportunity to um, be awakened in terms of an even more significant Black presence and Black contribution in this country through attending some lectures that Black students from University of Toronto were giving informally in the community when I was in high school. So that ultimately, later again, when I ended up being on the board of the Ontario Black History Society,
Mm-hmm.
I came already with the idea that we had a very long and important history and contribution in this country.
Mm-hmm.
And it was further spurred by the reality that by this time I had 3 children,
Mm-hmm.
and I was horrified to fully realize through a whole range of things, and not that you forget, because I'm here, I didn't live someplace else. I lived in Toronto, but I was just so starkly reminded
Mm-hmm.
that things had not gotten that much better from the
Mm-hmm.
time I was little.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly there have been things that have changed and improved and broadened and become more inclusive. But even at that point in time, and we're talking about 1993, when I became the president of the Ontario Black History Society, things were still not that much different.
Right.
Who was in government, who was in leadership in corporations, who were on the agencies, boards, and commissions, how were Black people portrayed on TV, what was good and what was bad, what
Mm-hmm.
did people generally think they knew about Black people in this country. It was still very, very much
Mm-hmm.
um, a stereotypical version.
Right. Right. So, and that, I like the way you said it was such a stereotypical version, right? Because, like I said, the kind of Black person that I saw growing up in Ghana was completely different from when I arrived in Canada. When I arrived in Canada, it seemed like I was seeing Black people related to violence and living a substandard lifestyle. It seemed like the stories that were being told were always of death, shootings, and all that. So it was quite a shock to my system. Needless to say, I knew there was a better story. Like you, when you went to church on Sunday, there was a bigger and a better story. And so
Yes.
I had to look for people so that because it became a very lonely and a very drastic emotional journey, right? It was almost delusional, like, no, this is not about, what do I do? So then I started looking for people such as yourselves because I didn't see my own Ghanaian person in a role that I could see, but I could see you, which didn't matter at all that you were Ghanaian or whatever. the most important thing was that here's a Black woman who was working to tell my story and our story. So, what has the journey been like? I can't imagine that it's been easy for you, because I know the little I've done hasn't been easy.
Um, it wasn't easy. And you know, when you're doing it, you're not necessarily thinking about, is this easy? Is it hard? Am I a trailblazer? Am I not?
Mm-hmm.
I came into the situation unexpectedly. I didn't plan to be. I wasn't angling to be the president of the Ontario Black History Society, but I happened to get to a board meeting on time, and they had the election, and that was it. So I didn't come in with this plan, you know, this, you know, I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna. But once I was there, it was, for me, I took it as a very, and I still see it as a very, I still see my work, my effort as being like a trustee
Mm-hmm.
for a very precious legacy, which is us and our story,
Right.
and making things better for us. So I did everything, and I knew, because I didn't need, not that studies aren't important, they are, but I was coming into the experience having lived in this country and already knowing what was not there from my own experience, and then, of course, through the experience of my children. So I
Mm-hmm.
was able to try and find ways to address some of those things that were not there.
Mm-hmm.
And and that meant that I was doing it through the framework of the, or of an organization that already had been established, that had
Mm-hmm.
already made some incredible, significant contributions, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was building on them and extending them, and I was doing it like my life depended on it, because it
Yes.
did. It did.
Yes.
And my life and everybody's life. I mean, if we needed, we needed books, we needed Black history in school, we needed to see positive images, we needed exhibits, we needed the Black History Month posters that the organization created. We
Mm-hmm.
needed all of those things because everything was missing. And
Mm.
the other part of that is that I felt it was very important to start early. A lot of what some people seem to focus on was doing things for university students. That's great,
Mm-hmm.
but you suffer, you are harmed, you are invisibilized long before you ever might get to university.
Mm.
So
Mm.
you need to start as early so that kids feel that they're not alone.
Mm-hmm.
Kids feel that there are people who look like them that have done things.
Mm-hmm.
And that idea that you can't be it unless you can see it, it's very true. Because
Mm.
what do our young people see? If you were seeing only criminals, is that what you're to aspire to?
Exactly.
And the broader society at that time, and maybe even now, I mean, what is the interest of the broader society?
Mm-hmm.
If things are to continue the way they were, then there didn't need to be room made to include Black people in a more meaningful way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So,
So it
go
was
ahead.
important. No, it was just important to me to try my best with
Yes.
the incredibly limited resources that were available to do
Mm-hmm.
as much as I could.
Beautiful. And you know, like I want to keep repeating this, because this conversation is almost emotional to me in the sense of my connection with you. So whilst you were out there working with limited resources, raising your children, trying to tell the story, what you didn't know was the impact you were having on a young girl somewhere. I mean, you knew in your mind that this needed to be done. What you didn't know was what you were telling a young girl like myself, who was also trying to find herself in a new place, in a new country, where it seemed as though she is limited, or
Mhm.
she is less than.
Yeah, yeah.
So, one of the things for me as an African girl and also a Ghanaian is, where did the Black story start in Canada? I think that is something many of us don't know, right? I think that is something many of us don't know, and we need to know. It is important that we know how the Black story began here in Canada. If you
Sure.
can give us a little bit on that,
Well,
I know I'll appreciate it.
there's a couple of different ways that we could talk about that. I think one way is, let me just um, mention. I'll mention two things that I think were important for me. One was, I remember earlier I mentioned that the university students were telling us about Black history,
Mm-hmm,
and in a more significant way.
mm-hmm,
And I ended up going into a bookstore that existed at that time, and there was a book that I picked up, Third World Books and Crafts, on Bathurst Street. It doesn't exist anymore. And it was operated by Lenny and Gwen Johnson, who in and of themselves were phenomenal historical and advocates for the community. But there was one book I took off the shelf, and you kind of leaf through,
mm-hmm,
and what it outlined was that the book was called They Came Before Columbus by Dr. Ivan van Sertima, who's no longer with us. And as I was leafing through this book, because the title was very curious to me, because we all learned. I mean, we would play games in the schoolyard about Christopher Columbus discovering America in 1492. So here was this book suggesting that there were Africans in the West before 1492.
mm-hmm.
And he goes through in this book, which I would highly recommend to anyone as an incredibly helpful resource. It stands alone. There are many others, but for me, that one just was so impactful. He talks about Africans being in the New World, in the West,
Mm-hmm.
in North America and South America and the Caribbean, in the 1400s, in the 1100s, in what is essentially Mexico, in
Mm-hmm.
800 AD, in with the Olmec, statues that were created. This was phenomenal. The
Mm-hmm.
idea that Africans were also navigators, because part of what we learn is that Africans, or what we learn by omission, is that Africans were kind of all just sitting on the continent waiting to be enslaved,
Mm.
as opposed to Africans were active participants in their own lives,
Mm-hmm.
had varied occupations and skills, just like other groups,
Mm-hmm.
and that they were even navigators and even people with culture, which was something that had never been conveyed to us before.
Right.
So I think that would be a really good place to start. But the other piece that I think makes it very concrete, the lands that we now call Canada
Mm-hmm.
were first settled
Mm-hmm.
briefly by the first African we have a name for. There were Africans in this land we now call Canada in the 1400s. They were coureurs de bois. They were helping with the fur trade in the 1400s and the 1500s. They helped to found the city of Chicago because the border's, pretty close, and
Mm-hmm.
also the city of Detroit. And so it's important to think about that.
Yes.
Um, but the first African that we have a name for, not just some, that they were Black people with other people, is Matthew da Costa. And
Mm.
Matthew da Costa was not a slave. He was a free African man
Okay.
who had skills in communication. He could speak at least 5 languages, which would include the language from his West African home, French, Portuguese, I believe Spanish, and the other language, the key language, is that
Mm.
he could speak Mi'kmaq.
Okay.
Now, how do
Okay.
you speak Mi'kmaq? Mi'kmaq is not a European language.
No.
It's not an African language.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Canadian language. And it means that he was here before. But he's recorded as traveling with Samuel de Champlain in 1604. He helped to effect trade between the West and Europe because he could work and understand the cultural ways of the First Nations on Canada's East Coast.
So
And he lived,
he wasn't in Canada as a slave.
no, he was not.
Okay.
And he was very highly sought, well paid, and lived in Canada for at least a year because they had to winter over. So he was here for a year for sure. Um, he was part of the first social order in Canada called the Order of Good Cheer.
Mm.
And I mean, I think that while I don't believe he has any descendants, but who knows?
Yes.
I don't believe he has any descendants. None have been officially put on the record. I think that the reality that this was somebody that was here, and this was somebody that was here early, and this is somebody that was so effective in their communication, so skilled at contract negotiation, that when I was on the Canada Post Stamp Advisory Committee, I made a point of ensuring that Matthew DaCosta was commemorated on one of the Canadian stamps.
Wow, wow. I'm anyway. So what we're saying is that there were blacks here who were not slaves. So we didn't land in Canada as slaves, correct?
That's
So
right.
yeah. So my thing is, we didn't land in Canada as slaves, but I also know that um there were there's a group of blacks who are sort of the origin, like, I don't know if I'm saying it the right way, but I often hear people say that there are blacks settled in Nova Scotia
Well,
first.
okay, so there are, Nova Scotia, at one point in time, Nova
Hmm.
Scotia was basically what was that Nova Scotia included New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island, essentially,
Hmm.
and Newfoundland. It was all considered Nova Scotia. So when we talk about Nova Scotia, historically, it also included essentially the Maritimes.
Okay.
And I just want to go back one second because I think it's important for us to, before we talk about generational Africans, I think that we also have to speak to the reality that Canada was absolutely founded on the existence of slavery in this country, which existed for a good 200 years before Confederation. So the structures upon which this country is founded on were connected very much to the transatlantic slave trade and the enslavement of First Nations and Africans, with the first named enslaved African being a child of about 8 years of age, and his name was Olivier Le Jeune, Oliver the Young One, and he was in Quebec.
Okay.
But in the Maritimes, there were in the area that we call Nova Scotia and New Brunswick currently, people went there following the American Revolutionary War because they had the opportunity to be given their freedom at that time,
Okay.
freedom from enslavement, if they helped to support the British side during the American Revolutionary War. Many people took up that offer,
Okay.
and they came to New Brunswick, they came to Nova Scotia, and they were given land, not immediately,
Mm-hmm.
and not great land, and not land that was particularly arable or very useful in many instances, and it was usually far removed from other white settlements.
Right.
So there are people who are Black who have been in this country since 1783.
Wow.
On my father's side, my family is part of the 1783 group.
Okay.
And in fact, I am the descendant of the Black loyalists, which is what they were called, the people who were given their freedom if they supported the British side, the
Mm-hmm.
late loyalists, the refugees of the War of 1812, and then closer in history, on my mother's side, I am the descendant of people who came into Canada on the Underground Railroad, also seeking their freedom.
Hmm. Wow. You know, I definitely will have you back because there's so much to our story that we cannot get to in 1 hour. But I want to now go on to Black History Month, right? Now, Black History Month, I get excited about Black History Month.
Me
Why?
too.
I do. It's like Christmas, right? I know sometimes people will say every month is Black History Month. But the importance and the significance of Black History Month to me is like a birthday. I mean,
Mhm.
every day is a day for you, but there's a day where your friends and your family remember you and wish you well, and you feel like the most important person on the face of the earth. So, how did Black History Month? Because I will always refer to Ghana in the sense that in Ghana, we never celebrated Black History Month, right? And so when I got here and I was hearing about Black History Month, it was a little strange to me. But then eventually I got to understand and joined in. So, where did Black History Month um, how did it become a part of our Canadian lifestyle? And what did it take to get there? It must not have been easy.
Hmm. Let me just go back a bit because, of course, you would not need a Black History Month in Ghana when your story, your presence, your reality is reflected everywhere around you
Right,
in a Black majority country. But in the West, we were not in a majority situation.
right.
And in 1926, a Black intellectual, Carter G. Woodson, conceived of the idea to have something called Black Negro History Week.
Mm,
And from Negro History Week became Black History Month. This was in 1926. By the 1970s, it was then considered Black History Month. In the 1950s,
mhm.
Negro History Month, Black History Month was celebrated in Toronto within the Black community
Okay.
at the British Methodist Episcopal Church, and it was organized by the Canadian Negro Women's Association. And the first host of the first celebration within the Black community was Stanley G. Grizel. But that didn't become a bigger thing
Hmm.
until the Ontario Black History Society was organized in 1978 with
Hmm.
Dr. Daniel G. Hill, Joan Kazmarski, Wilson O. Brooks, and a number of other people who helped to secure the first proclamation of February as Black History Month with the city of Toronto.
Mm,
And that's what we had starting in 1979. So 1979, 1989, 1993, Rosemary is now the president. And Rosemary was at home with her third child because I didn't go into the office
right.
because the office was very small. You had to pay for parking. It was hard to find parking downtown. And I had three children. That's babysitting. How do you arrange that?
Yeah,
This was not a paid position.
exactly.
So I used my phone at home. Later, I ended up with a computer and a fax at home so that the volunteers could use the equipment in the office. At any rate, I didn't know that I had to go to the city of Toronto and request a formal proclamation for February as Black History Month. And we almost didn't have it. I mean, we missed the deadline. And I was panicking. It's like, this can't happen on my watch. This is terrible. So I did everything I could. I begged, pleaded, and cried, got the proclamation, and I thought I'm never going to be in this situation again.
Hmm.
And no one in the future should be in this situation.
Hmm.
So I got what I felt was a more secured annual proclamation with the city. Then I went to the province of Ontario because I think I felt, and my board agreed, that Black History Month was something that everybody should be benefiting from.
Mm-hmm.
Because for us, we learn about us and
Mm-hmm.
we feel pride in us. It's our birthday party, right?
Yes.
But for the broader community, it's an opportunity, or at least at that moment in time, I felt it could be an opportunity for them to really develop a more balanced sense of their own historical contribution, because white people alone are not the only ones who've contributed to the development of this country.
Exactly.
So I went to the province, and the province was able to effect a Black History Month proclamation through my contact there, Daniel O'Brien. Then I went to every province in the country to get them to commemorate Black History Month. Then I went to representatives that I knew in the federal government, my own personal representatives, but pointedly Black representatives, people who I thought would have a vested personal interest,
Yes.
including Senator Ann Cools and other Black members of Parliament. And ultimately, it did land with Jean Augustine, and I supplied her office with all kinds of Black history information and other MPs.
Mm-hmm.
And it was built upon the hundreds of Black history presentations that I had been doing, or well, by that time it was, yeah, I was building building upon what had already been done with the OBHS. But I
Right.
know that I personally was doing hundreds, and by the time of my departure from the OBHS, it was thousands of Black history presentations and radio and TV interviews to get people interested and motivated and aware that there was this thing called Black History Month that we could all celebrate.
Mm.
So it was I remember the excitement in 1995 as it looked like it was going to happen, and finally I got the call from her office it was going to go through and I could watch it on CPAC, and I said yes.
Yes.
And then I organized a bus trip for people to go up to the first national celebration that was going to be held in Ottawa. And I couldn't even take the bus because I just didn't have enough time to be on the bus and do other things that I had to do in Ottawa. So I flew to Ottawa. I was the only non-elected person welcomed on stage.
Mm.
And I presented the Prime Minister, Jean Chrétien, with the official OBHS Black History Month poster,
Mm.
which was actually an art print done by African artist from the continent, David Kubuka.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just so touching and powerful. And
Imagine.
oh, I remember
Loves
feeling
that.
like this is going to make such a difference.
Yeah. Yes.
And I think it has, maybe not as much of a difference as I would have hoped, but it has certainly been a very important part of that process.
Well, I will tell you that for this girl who has been following you all these years, and then Ontario, the name Ontario Black History Society alone to me means a lot, because I'll tell you one thing. I was born and raised in Ghana, right? So we're going through, our daily lives and all of that. One thing I realize is the depth of our story that I didn't know. You see what I mean? It's the depth of our story. Of course, we knew about slave trade and this and that, but to us, it was just at least to me, I wouldn't speak for everybody. To me, it was just another thing that happened. And once in a while, we'll go to the slave ports, which is like a normal thing. It's not a big deal, right? Then I got to Canada, and then I began. So I want you to understand. You may say that you haven't seen as much of a difference, or you thought would be more, but the work that you all have done, you, Jean Augustine, the Share newspaper at the time, Anne Marie, I mean, so many other people opened up the eyes of this African girl who now began to understand her story, not just on the surface, but the depth of it. And that has caused me to also continue to do the work that I do. And I know from what young people say to me is that they are also beginning to understand. So you've done massive work on that level. And I plan to continue to walk behind you, watch you, have the courage to also step forward. But now let's go on to Emancipation Day, which was just announced. And I saw you speak about it. And my heart was like, oh, here's another thing. Here's another victory that tells me that we're still working, that we're still moving. So tell me, and anybody listening, about Emancipation Day, its importance, and how it all came about.
Well, certainly, first of all, Emancipation Day is the date when in this place in Canada, because it is a little bit different in other parts of the world, but it's the date when slavery ended. So it refers to the passage of the British Imperial Act, or the Slavery Abolition Act, that was passed in July 1833. But because it took a year for Britain to get around to all of her colonies, it did not go into effect until August 1st, 1834, in this place we now call Canada. In places like Jamaica, for example, it didn't happen for another 4 years, 1838. But here, in this place, 1834. And it's pivotal because that was the first global legislation that ended chattel slavery. And
That was
it then 1834. And that helped to lead to other global powers also ending their global slave trade. So that's what it is. But how did it happen in this country? Well, obviously, it didn't happen with me. Emancipation celebrations sprang up immediately in this country come 1834, when Black people who were enslaved here, Black people who were now freed here, Black people who may have already been free by 1834 because they had freed themselves anyway, they broke into spontaneous outbursts of joy, praise, and dance. And they were doing what they were doing also in support of people who were still enslaved around the world, particularly in the United States, because many of them had just come from the United States or were not too far removed from a slave experience in the United States, but also because they were concerned about other Black people who were still held in slavery.
Yeah.
And they did what they could through usually churches or missionary or abolition societies to try and provide assistance. But it speaks to the resilience and the resistance of our community over time. But the piece that I worked on came about in 1995. And sorry, let me just go back one more minute. There were two very big celebrations that had been happening for Emancipation Day before I ever became involved. Big ones, huge, bigger. The only thing that was bigger was Caravana when it began. So one was in Windsor under the auspices of Walter Perry, and the other one was connected to the UNIA and BJ Spencer Pitt of Toronto, and it took place at Lakeside Park in Port Dalhousie, which is near St. Catharines, Ontario.
Okay.
Both of these were huge. They were bi-national celebrations, having guests and participants from the United States and Canada.
Okay.
They were massive, but especially the one in Windsor. And both of them fizzled out in part because of government and police um, decisions,
Mhm.
because there were concerns about the possible negative impact of rioting during the civil rights movement in the 1960s. So in 1995, I was introduced to the idea that we should be formalizing a commemoration of Emancipation Day. I
Mm,
had never been to an Emancipation Day event,
okay.
short of attending Caravana, but Caravana did not always connect for me
Mhm.
as a Canadian, dancing in the street to
The story.
understanding what emancipation was.
Right.
And I was introduced to the concept by somebody who went on to become the ambassador of Trinidad and Tobago. We were able, because he did remain in Toronto for a number of months, we were able to secure proclamations marking August 1st as Emancipation Day with the City of Toronto, Metro Toronto, and the City of Ottawa by 1996.
Mm,
By about 1998, because I had approached this in a nonpartisan way, um, I had also started to see about advocating to get it national,
mhm.
because I felt that if we had it as a national event, it was then assumed and would be celebrated in provincially and municipally. So just to go right to national. Preston Manning held a reception and offered his support, but it wasn't until 1999 that Deepak Abdrai um, used a private member's bill, his private member's bill, and it went to second reading twice. Went
Mm,
to second reading twice in 2000, didn't go through. In the meantime, I was also working, having events, building up a community of support as best I could with the resources that I had.
mhm.
Um, by 2008, it became the first unanimous all party Bill 111 in the province of Ontario, put
Okay.
forward by Ted Arnott, who's now Speaker of the House, Maria Van Bommel, and Peter Kormos.
Mm,
And then I again, with this, not with the OBHS, I was on my own. And in 2015, I began the process with this new government, hoping that we would be able to see Emancipation Day commemorated across Canada. Went
mm,
to my own MP, Arifurani, went to Greg Fergus, started a parliamentary petition, which I submitted February 14th, 2016. And Senator Wanda Thomas Bernard indicated that she wanted to work on it. Went to second reading twice in the Senate, didn't go through.
oh man.
So now it ends up back in the House of Commons. Majid Jahawari takes it to second reading. It looks like I wasn't sure what was going to happen. Anyway, long story, ends up final reading March 24th, 2021. I'm watching the votes and I realize everybody's voting in favor. The
Ooh,
comments are all in favor.
ooh.
When it got to be, when we had more than 50%, I started to actually feel emotional.
Yeah.
And I realized it was going to be unanimous. So the motion 36 was passed, and that made it Emancipation Day across Canada. And it was later adopted in the Senate through Senator Wanda Thomas Bernard. But I mean, why would I believe that it was going to go through in March of 2021 when there had been so many opportunities
And it
for it
did.
to go through? We could have been celebrating Emancipation Day for the past 20 years,
Yes.
but it didn't go through.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very, very, very grateful for um, all of those people who signed petitions,
Mm-hmm.
all of those people who came to events, all of those people who were also getting in touch with their MPs.
Mm-hmm.
All of those people, including, of course, and very much MP Majid Jahare and Senator Wanda Thomas Bernard for their efforts politically to make this happen, because that's how our system works.
Mm-hmm.
We there's I think that people are forgetting their own agency if they think that government alone will do things. We
Mm-hmm.
have to push, we have to request, we
Thank,
have to do the work.
thank
And
you.
everyone can do that, some of that work.
Thank you. I like that you said we have to push, we have to do the work. I often, I often say to people, of course, we know that racism does exist,
Absolutely.
but you just said we have to push, we have to work, right? I often say to people, if we want to see change, we have to be the ones that take the first step and
Often.
give up. Because sometimes the concept you're bringing to the table is new to the people at the table.
Mhm.
Maybe they don't know. Maybe they know and have decided not to know. But for you that sees the importance of whatever you're bringing to the table, it is your duty, number one, to not be angry, to come and to seek that you're understood, right? Because I believe that once we understand each other, we can begin to communicate from a colorless place. Because now you understand me, I understand you. Our humanity is now what's on the table. Based on all the work that you've done, would you agree to the statement that I've just made? Because you've been up, you've been down, you've been up, you've been down. You've wanted to give up trying to live your life, raise your children, just be Rosemary, right? But you never gave up. And today
No.
we're all here, but you worked with a whole group of people. So, what would you tell the rest of us who are doing the best we can in our little corners and are facing the rejections and the disappointments? What would you tell us so that we don't give up?
I think that we have to think about what the future is going to be. I think that we have to think about what we want for ourselves 6 months from now, a year from now, 10 years from now. What do we want for our children? What do we want for our society? What is it that, what is your purpose? And um, I think that for me, my purpose was very clear to me a very long time ago. And this isn't always easy
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes people don't like what you're doing, or don't like that you continue to push, or don't like that they feel that you're, whatever they feel. I mean, it's very
Or
complicated
think you're
in our community.
or they
Uh,
think
it,
you're in
it's
the light and it's all going good for you.
Well, and the thing is, just when you said that, I have an American colleague who has been working on um, elements of emancipation as well. And what he said to me one day is that he knows that I work every day. I'm
Mm,
doing something every day. I don't just show up for the party. And
yeah.
and when I was with the OBHS, I felt that when I was out there and people saw me, that they understood that I was out there because I wanted them to see that I was representing them, and
Right.
that I was hoping to put forward their ideas and interests and wishes. I wasn't there because there was, like, it cost me
Mm-hmm.
very dearly.
Yeah.
I'm not just talking about, money and gas money and parking. I mean, it had costs. There
Mm,
were things that, and so I was there because I was doing everything in my power to represent this organization. And in fact, because of the nature of the funding cuts to the organization continues because of some of the major sacrifices that I made. I didn't go in planning to make them, but they needed to be made if that space
mm-hmm.
was going to continue.
Mm-hmm.
And I think not everybody needs to do that. But what I hope that everybody will understand, that it's important, if you are not able or not motivated or um, to do certain things, then support the people who are doing it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Please repeat that.
Support people who are doing the work if you yourself are not doing the work. And also, there's not just one way to do the work. I've realized that there's this curious thing that exists that unless you're standing in the middle of an intersection with a bullhorn screaming, then you're not a leader. And or that you're not making a difference. And I
Mhm.
think that there are many different ways to
Mm,
affect change.
mm,
And you have to adopt the ways that work for you with the skill set that you have and the access that you're able to make.
mm. You know, Rosemary, there are so many questions that I have for you. Seeking my own understanding, one, of the Canada that I live in, to add to the journey that I'm on. And
Mm.
I find that, when I combine Ghanaian culture and Canadian culture and who we are as Black people in Canada, I see such wealth. I see such wealth and I see such power, right? But some of us grew up being told, don't speak too much, don't show your face too much. Sometimes you're actually threatened, and people who themselves are afraid will say, why are you so in front? Every day, you're out there doing this and doing that. Please whisper some kind words into the hearts of those young ones or even older ones who now want to step up to the plate. But they have experienced the torture, they've experienced the backlash, they've experienced loss. As you said, yours was, there are losses I'm sure you don't even want to talk about, to come to get to this point. But from the place of courage, from where you're coming from, whisper a few words into the hearts and into the minds of those of us who are also doing the best that we can because we know that there is more to give to humanity.
Well, I think it would be an appeal to their conscience because
Mm,
if you are not making the effort to confront and address and facilitate the changes that you know need to be made, who's going to do it?
mm,
Who, you're the grown up. You're the one that has to take care of it.
mm.
And I think that racism doesn't eradicate itself.
Thank
It's
you.
something that we have to work at eradicating.
Thank you. You know, Rosemary, I have no words to explain what I feel about you agreeing to be part of this, but I've decided that there has to be a history segment of this show along the way so that this could also be another platform where I learn, and I mean learn earnestly, where I learn so that whatever step I'm taking, I know where I'm coming from, and then I can bring the Ghanaian stuff to add to it, because once we combine it, it is such a powerful and inspiring message to not only Black people but to humanity. Because one thing is, I see it every day in my line of work with the Ghana High Commission, how people hunger for the culture and all of that. So may God bless and keep you and continue to give you the strength. But I'm telling you, this, we're not done. This is only the beginning of the journey that I want to travel with you, because I feel like there's so much I can learn from you so that I can hand it down to the next generation. I so appreciate you coming on the show, and I'll definitely be in touch for us to plan more and more and more. Thank you so much. Have a good weekend and have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on your show, and I look forward to more in the future.
Yes, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, I do appreciate all of you for tuning in. Do share this video because we have a lot to teach and we have a lot to learn. So do share it. Ask your friends to share it. And if you have any questions, email me endlesspossibilities@rogers.com. Stay blessed and continue to be the best you can be in your home, in your community, and in your country, wherever you are. Bye-bye.
TV.